Would you like to learn from those that are taking their lives, their businesses, and their passions to the next level? Best-selling author of Speakeasy and master connector Lou Diamond is here to connect you to some of the most inspiring and amazing people on this planet. Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
You're the sin that I've been waiting for. The hands around my throat, it's all I can think about.
Welcome everyone to an absolutely spectacular episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond. Man, this one's going to be epic. Because today on Thrive Loud, I've got one of the CIA's most highly decorated operations officers who served in multiple field assignments for the United States. He specialized in counterterrorism, the Middle East and South Asia, and spent extensive time in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's the recipient of numerous awards, which I was going to skim over, but I have to read them because they're so unbelievably impressive. The Distinguished Career Intelligence Medal, the Intelligence Commendation Medal, the Intelligence Medal of Merit, and the Distinguished Intelligence Medal as well. Oh my goodness. He's an on-air contributor for MSNBC, a regular on Morning Joe, an amazing leadership speaker, and an author of Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons Learned from the CIA. Leadership Lessons from the CIA. I don't want to add more titles to what it already is, but you get the idea. We're dealing with somebody, by the way, that I've also known for a very long time. This interview is 30 years in the making. I just made age spots pop all over him. Thrive Loud listeners, I bring you Marc Polymeropoulos. Marc, welcome to Thrive Loud.
It is great to be here. And yeah, 30 years. It's pretty incredible. But you found me, finally. You tracked me down.
It wasn't easy. Thrive Loud listeners need to know, Marc and I went to college together. He's slightly older than I am. We spent many a Monday nights hanging out together, drinking. We in some basements in certain places, and know each other from college. And literally, if there was a gap in somebody's resume, he'd be the definition of what that would be, because he had gone away from all the stuff that you've just heard about. Here's how I want to kick things off. And actually, beforehand, let's give a shout out to our good friends Michelle Katz and Stephanie Gitlin of the Cornell Thank You podcast. They just had a great episode. We're going to provide links to that episode for the viewers and watchers. You got to watch it so he can you can learn a little bit more about Marc, about his days in Cornell, and some of the embarrassing stuff that we won't talk about here. Or maybe we will. Who knows?
Sure.
But here's the way I wanted to start this off, Marc. It's an amazing life and thing that you did. I think it's important to do a little rewind here. And I want to rewind to the point, why did you go work for the CIA when you graduated college? What was the draw for you to go into this line of work and this amazing life that has led for you?
So first of all, it's wonderful to be here, and it's great coming on with folks who know me from the past, because I know you will always pronounce my name correctly. So Polymeropoulos isn't easy; everyone stumbles over it.
Hold on, I got to say this: listeners need to know that I was required to not only know this information, I almost had to break out a certain pledge book that I had to memorize all of his information. So I had to know it. I practiced it at night. So continue, Marc.
But I think one of the neat things about my life now is I've come out of the shadows, and I kind of talk about my career, is that everyone has a life journey, and the CIA has so much mystique, but actually it's really made up of regular men and women who just kind of choose a pretty unique career path. For me, I think I do look back at kind of seminal events in my life. When I was 10 years old, I grew up in New Brunswick, New Jersey. My dad was a college professor, and he was on a sabbatical. He was at Rutgers. He was on a sabbatical in Algeria, and so imagine this for the listeners, that my mom, at 10 years old, puts me on an airplane by myself, and I fly all through Paris alone to Algiers. And my dad and I spend an entire month, and I'm 10, but an entire month traveling 2,000 miles through the Sahara Desert in a Volkswagen minibus. And so then, I thought I was Lawrence of Arabia. So, these are kind of the things that my parents kind of exposed me to a lot of stuff. There's a big world out there. As we were kind of hanging out on Monday nights, I think in our fraternity it was called Monday Night Drinking Club, which is probably one of the great names of all time. I can't believe I don't have a shirt from that. It needs t-shirts. But that's not something I think we were sitting around talking about. But I did have this notion there's a big world out there, and I wanted to do something in national security. And, and I probably watched Tom Clancy, movies or read Tom Clancy books, but it seemed like, something that it would make sense because I just knew there was something out there for me. And I was really interested in the Middle East. And so, off I went after Cornell. And then, 30 years later, I can talk about it a little bit.
You can talk about it a little bit, right? Otherwise, you don't have to. We always joked about the fact that if you spoke to Mark, he couldn't tell you anything because he would have to kill you.
Of course.
Here's the interesting part, and I want to ask the question because I thought about this. I was trying to say, how am I going to cue this up for Mark? And I realized this was the one that I really wanted to ask. What did you love about working at the CIA?
So I think that it's hard to get in there. Especially as for what I'm going to say now regarding Cornell, it's pretty funny. But it's harder to get into the CIA than it is to get into Harvard. And so that's.
But who would want to go to that school?
Well,
anyway?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, come on.
But ultimately, it's a small elite organization. Obviously, it has a lot of mystique. But the notion of kind of being on the tip of the spear for the United States government, we are always forward deployed. There's no coming home. There's no withdrawal from Afghanistan. You become a CIA operations officer and you spend most of your career overseas, and intelligence is the nation's first line of defense. So it's the idea of being in places like Syria or Egypt or Pakistan or Afghanistan. And, you're there first. You're reporting on events. You're not only witnessing history, but sometimes you're helping shape history. And so it was a small elite club. And kind of the last part of it, I think, which is really important, is that the role of an operations officer, an intelligence officer, my job was to spot, assess, develop, recruit, and handle spies, Russians, Iranians, Chinese, penetrations of Al Qaeda, and these individuals really, it's extraordinary the relationship you have with someone who you recruit and you handle because they've put their life in your hands. And so ultimately, I think it's something that really appealed to me. And in particular, just that idea of that personal bond you had with, what we call our assets.
So the line of work you chose and the specialty that you went in, let's call it what it is. It's dangerous at certain aspects of it. And obviously to an outsider looking in, we talked about it before, between the movies, the draw of the excitement of what the CIA is all about. There's some really cool things. In fact, I laughed. You actually said in your interview and your appearance on Cornell, thank you, the word fun about 15 times, about how much fun it was to do some things that would, whether it was for a mission, research, analytics, flipping someone to be an asset. All of this is like, obviously, it's exciting, cool stuff, which you deem as fun, but a lot of people would also put in that level of danger. So while you loved this work that you were doing, was there an aspect that you felt really, there were moments of fear, there were moments of vulnerability? Obviously, everybody goes through that. You're in areas and you've been in war zones. Share with the listeners maybe that aspect of it. Obviously, we know what you love about it. What were some of the things that maybe, made the job hard?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that, there's times that fear was certainly there. I mean, I'd be lying not to. I was in an embassy in the Middle East when, Al Qaeda attacked the embassy. And so, grenades are hitting the roof of the embassy. There's automatic weapons fire. We thought we were going to die that day. And so, my blood pressure went from, or heart rate went from 0 to 1,000. But you go through a lot of training to deal with this, and then as you become more experienced, when I was, after I'd been to Iraq and Afghanistan, then I went back to Afghanistan for an entire year, and so you have these experiences, and so you know how to deal with kind of high pressure situations. But I mean, I'd be lying. There are times certainly when I was scared. We were in Afghanistan I was on some raids with some special operations forces, and it can get pretty hairy. But you'd be crazy not to be scared. It's just the idea of kind of managing that fear. And then, ultimately you do have a sense of responsibility. It was, especially after 9/11, we had this notion that, we were the ones kind of manning the ramparts. If we're not going to go after Al Qaeda, who is, we really were it. And so, you also have a sense of responsibility to the American people. But I mean, I'd be lying. Like, there was plenty of times where I was like crapping my pants. That's normal. I mean, again, but it's just the notion of kind of who kind of raises their hand and says, hey, I'll do this. And that was kind of, I think, unique about a lot of my colleagues. I always tell people that I wasn't, it was a wonderful introduction with all my kind of fancy hardware. But I was one of many really remarkable officers there. and really at an incredible time. Because again, if you remember the feeling after 9/11 that we were going to get hit again, and the CIA really wasn't at the forefront of trying to protect the American people, and that was I mean, for lack of a better term, that was an amazing responsibility, and a lot of it was fun. I mean, I will tell you that. It's an honest feeling that I had. I would sit around sometimes pinch myself. I said, I can't believe we're doing these things.
Amazing. By the way, I my own 9/11 experience, I was across the street from the Trade Center when all this stuff went down. And I know that I had a shift as well, which many Americans did as well, about, even thinking about fighting for your country or defending or certain or public service and first responders. I mean, like things that people have changed their views of all of that. And obviously you were already there when you were already involved in this line of work. And now obviously it's amplified with the spectrum on it. This is the thing that I've always, I guess, wanted to know. Yes, you earned all these things, and there's many people, you're being very modest about all the work. You've been there, you were there for a very long time. And I would imagine it's above average, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, of the amount of times you've served there. This is the part I want to look at. Was it one of those that you knew when you got in, this is the only place you really wanted to be, this was your mission? Or was it one of those things that that's the circumstances and how things worked out?
I mean, no, it's kind of the Roach Motel. Once you're in the agency, you never leave. So no, but it's a unique job. It's very hard to get in. And there are a lot of people who do it for a career. Now, you actually bring up a really interesting subject. It was something I've talked about, and I just wrote about recently, is that there is a generational divide. And I'm sure you think I'd talk about this on the show here, but, Gen Z is different. And so my generation coming in, you join the agency and you're there for your career. There really is not that much turnover. It's a different generation now. And, when I retired in 2019, it was interesting dealing with, younger officers who actually asked and demanded for things, in many cases rightfully so, like work-life balance, like being a little more empathetic as leaders. They would, I was used to, being told what to do. Hey, go do this, and sometimes you just kind of salute and go. But this generation is, well, they want to know why, and by the way, that's okay. But it really, and if we don't get that right now, we will see kind of attrition. People I think, are leaving the intelligence community earlier if they're not satisfied. But in my generation, you're in, and you spend your whole career there, and then but it's you also have this incredible bond with your fellow colleagues. I mean, I have tremendous friends who I've gone through really trying times with. And one note, Lou, just to talk about that, and I do have a pretty strong sense of kind of humility. Because with all these operational successes, and you kind of read off all those kind of fancy medals I got, there also were a lot of failures too. Yeah. And I had friends who were killed. I was involved in operations in which people didn't come home, and that was I mean, maybe it's a little too dramatic when I say traumatic, but it had a really strong effect on me in the sense that we do some amazing things. There's a lot of really highs. But then the lows are really bad too, because the price for failure in our business is that sometimes people die. And so that was so at the end of my career, I really had a very strong sense of humility, even though kind of we're built up into these kind of superhuman, operators in a really unique job. But there was some really tough times as well.
And by the way, thank you for sharing that. And this is a good segue to this, because I think part of those, the successes and the fun and the humility of everything that you had to experience, and obviously the ultimate price for many of your colleagues and people that you were close with, working in very tight situations and close relationships, you learn a lot of things, and it helps to develop you. And it was really interesting because I learned a little bit about your initial part of your work. You do a lot of analytical work and a lot of self work, which isn't a situation where you're always necessarily leading. Yet over the time in your tenure over there, more responsibilities or more exposure has actually made you have a unique view of leadership. This is where I want to flip over to this lovely message you've written in your book, Clarity in Crisis, and the things you speak about. At what point did you realize you started to have a lot of unique skills in leadership and things that people will find applicable that you can share with others? When did all of that come together where you said, wow, all of this work actually people need to know about or can put into a good place? I'd love to connect the dots here and help people understand that.
And Lou, that's a great question. And one of the things I talk about a lot is that, I don't think leaders are born. Leaders are certainly, they're made based on experiences. And so let me just give you a framework for a CIA as an operations officer. your job is very often to work alone. So I'm out on the street. I have to meet an agent. I have to do something called run a surveillance detection route. So that's using what we call tradecraft. I have to make sure no one's followed me. So maybe I'm driving around for several hours. I put a disguise on, but everything is done on your own, including the core business of recruiting an agent too. And so you get really good at that, and then you're asked after you're really good to manage people, and all of a sudden you're not alone anymore, and it's actually not about you anymore. And so I think back to my first management jobs at CIA, and I was a terrible leader. Because they hire us, and you'll laugh at this, based on some really kind of key characteristics. I mean, it's almost kind of borderline narcissistic sociopaths. It's not really flattering for me. But ultimately, because you have to operate on your own, but then you're asked to lead. And so I was a crappy leader for a while. We don't do leadership training very well. And finally, at the end of my career, when at my last job, I had 2,000 people who were working for me in 50 plus countries. Across Europe and Eurasia. But I thought to myself, I said, I think I finally got it now. And of course, I'm going to retire. And so I started thinking about, okay, so I learned a lot of things along the way, particularly in crisis situations, in the Middle East. But I wanted to write a book about it. And I wanted these leadership lessons to be pretty basic and simple. I always joke, I said, I'm not going to get asked to, go speak at Harvard Business School about my leadership book. And then I was. But only in this, and I'd love to go to talk to Cornell as well. Actually, I did go to the Cornell in Washington program recently and talk to them. But ultimately, it was, it's the notion that I learned some things from kind of the streets. I mean, of the Middle East with the third world. I just thought it would be applicable. But boy, I was not a good leader to begin with. And again, it's another. If in any kind of position someone's in, and at CIA we do something, we write cables. It's an operational cable. So you're writing up things that happen, a meeting with an asset or a situation. I go back and I look at in 2003 or 4 when I had my first management job. Some of the stuff that I wrote. Oh my God. And I'll tell you something. It's really important because what it had in it. Still, there was the letter I. It was all about me.
Yeah.
And then fast forward 20 years, when I'm a senior manager in the senior intelligence service, the equivalent of a 3-star general, I don't write I anymore. It's about the team. And that's what, by the way, that's what the director of the CIA is going to judge me on. They don't care about me.
Right.
They care about how I'm managing the team. And so just that transition was so interesting.
Well, and in fairness to anyone, they're training you right out of the gate to be self-sufficient, to be very independent, to have to almost not have to be involved to be associated with people. And obviously from a leader point of view, and you made the comment about the different generation, the Gen Z, and the way they look at, having multiple opportunities or working different careers. Leading them now today is equally as challenging, specifically because I love what you had said. People told you what to do and you did it, and our generation did that. I was an analyst in Wall Street, and trust me, they told me to do it. I never questioned it or did whatever. Right. You just knew you had to pay your dues, and I guess that's part of it. Managing the different groups, the different leaders, the different types. I guess one of the best skill sets that you've had is that you've had the ability. You have to assess talent. You have to assess people. You really have to understand the ins and outs. And over time, those skills of doing that one-on-one probably carried on one-on-many and actually enabled you to have a bigger view. Have you ever thought of it that way? That's actually the lesson that you learned was eventually over time, you learned how to change the I into the we and make it more about the others and the bigger group. That's the lessons you've learned?
Yeah, 100%. And so you learn about empathy. And you learn a key skill. And again, think about it. The skill that I had in handling, let's say it was a Russian government official who's working for us. So the key skill that I learned was listening. An old boss of mine would say, if you're talking, you ain't listening. So basically shut up and listen. Because what does that mean? I have to actually assess if someone, how they're doing. Are they capable of operating, behind the lines, in essence, in Moscow or a place like that? So you have to listen. And that actually, helps later on in your career, especially when you're kind of managing big organizations. And again, also the notion of empathy too. Just being able. I mean, my job was to get people sometimes to do things that they didn't necessarily think they could do, sometimes not want to do. I mean, if a Russian's going to spy for us, there's some motivations that I have to kind of find behind them. But then you translate that into, running a bigger organization. And that those skills certainly can work. And again, it's also the notion of not of the team is what matters, not just yourself. But the CIA still is struggling with this because again, we hire sociopathic narcissists. It's part. I mean, really, like that's true. But without that kind of little last piece, which makes it some illegal behavior. So
some people would argue, and I'm going to flip this to the business side, that plenty of the people who are successful and leaders of businesses, you need an ego. There is part of being a leader that does require an ego. It's also a matter of how you know how to let go of it and know when to hold on to it, right? I think that's a lot of the different ways you have to manage. There are certain things about delegation or positioning that are important, but there's also certain ways of, okay, here's where I need to have the team together. And those are skills that people have. And maybe you need to have a little narcissism in you. Otherwise, you'd be just giving it all away if you would.
I think that a key leadership trait, well, it's something that happens, when you got it, when you nailed it, is when you understand, okay, I'm the boss, but you know what? It's okay to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. Again, now in a hyper type A competitive atmosphere that CIA was, you're always the biggest badass. But then all of a sudden, when you're running a team or, especially a large unit, you actually have to say to yourself, I want the smartest people. And you know what? They might be better than me. And that's good. And it's, by the way, it's also not a threat. I'm not going to be threatened by really, great junior officers or junior managers. You want to harness all that they can do because, again, this director of the CIA is not comparing me to them. He's saying, or she's saying, Mark, are you running your unit effectively? But that was a really interesting point when I'd sit around and say, damn, like some of these folks are not only the good, they're better than me, better than I was, and I'm good with that.
Yeah. I ask a signature question on this show, and I know this is probably going to relate to something that had happened to you because I know the background story of this, and I'm imagining this is where it's going to connect. I'm front running or leading here. You are thriving on look, you've had a great career. You're here. You've gone through some ups and downs and some serious downs with all of that. So, which means that while on most days when you're thriving, there are days when you're not quite kicking on all cylinders and you're a little off your game. I love to ask people who are thriving throughout their careers and their businesses and their passions, when you're not thriving, what practice do you seek? Or maybe which individual do you seek out to get yourself back on the thriving track?
So what a great question. And I've thought about it and I practice it. And it all stems from a good friend of mine. He was the command sergeant major of Delta Force. That's the Army's most elite special operations unit. Him and I spent half a year together in Syria at one point. And he taught me something. And he calls it the combat leadership chassis. So what does that mean? It's the whole idea of taking care of yourself. So there's so many things that can go wrong. There's so many kind of unknowns. Things out of your control. But this is what he explained me to do, and it's what I do and what I've taught others as well. So you wake up in the morning. So first of all, you got to make sure you slept. So sleep is an enormous component in health. I don't care if you're in special operations, intelligence, or the business world. So sleep. Number 2 is nutrition. What you put in your body. I'm 54 years old now, but at the end of my career, I mean, it does matter. What you eat. There's hydration. Again, you're talking about elite, high-performing athletes. Are you drinking enough of water? Then there's things that came to me, which really ground me even now, but it was much later in life. Things like meditation, obviously exercise, but yoga. But kind of it sounds like a little new agey. And I always tell a story. In 2015, I flew into the U.S. Embassy in Sana'a, Yemen, to visit officers who were working for me, and I saw a whole bunch of officers, so bunch of people on this small little patch of grass, in the middle of a desert, but at the embassy, and they're doing yoga. And of course I said something stupid and I was a jerk. And I said, who are them, with some disdain. They said, well, that's members of SEAL Team 6 and the CIA station. I was like, all right, what a jerk I am. I shut up. And then later on, I started practicing those things. And there's even things such as journaling. There's, but there's ways to take care of yourself, which are absolutely critical. Your career and your life really is a marathon. And so that kind of self-care was important to me, is important to me now. It wasn't for a long time, but one of the things I try to talk and teach is just that idea of wellness. I mean, wellness and resiliency is kind of a big buzzwords now, but the elite high performing athletes or members of special operations and intelligence community really do practice that. And I think it's absolutely critical. And that's, I have a morning checklist. I do this stuff.
Yeah. Mark, would you say that it's, that the CIA is proactive in that area, or were they a little reactive in taking on a lot of those practices and understanding the importance of that wellness. And, there's been some questions on, are they front runners with this? And your new agey comment is a good thing because look, the U.S. military has taken a long time to get to where they needed to. What's your take on that from the CIA?
No, they were way reactive. I remember going through before I retired. We had kind of mindfulness training, there was such kind of disdain and scorn for this. But these things work. And again, if and over time they kind of get institutionalized. But to me, when I saw, kind of the practical effects of this, I mean, and because at the end of the day, the job that we had at CIA, the same thing with the military, we had 20 years of the global war on terrorism, and people were really beat up. It costs $250,000 to train a CIA officer. It's crazy if we don't take care of those people. Yeah. And because then because they break, and after 20 years of Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Somalia and multiple deployments, I remember flying around Afghanistan when I was in my 40s. I'm like, man, my back hurts. Like this is too much for me. But you got to take care of people. And the last piece, going back to Gen Z, if we don't do these things, the Gen Z crowd is going to look around and look for a place that does. It's simple as that. And so it also is kind of really important, I think, for the retention of personnel.
Let's do the admin part of the show before we go down a fun version of Fun Street here. Share with the listeners all the places people can learn about you, grab your book, any of that stuff, all the places they can find Marc Polymeropoulos. We'll put it in the show notes. It gets more engagement when they hear it from you.
So wrote the book, Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA. It's on Amazon. Certainly can order it there. I have a website, marcpolymeropoulos.com. You probably need to go in the show notes for the spelling of that. And then, I'm on LinkedIn with my name, and then finally, if people really, want to torture themselves, I'm on Twitter. It's @mpolymer. And I'll tweet about just about anything, whether it's a serious stuff like, what's happening in Israel, Gaza, Ukraine, Russia, but then I'll tweet about baseball. And today I was really amused. There's this big scandal now about the new Major League Baseball uniforms.
They're like see-through. They're
tight the pants are, and they're see-through. And so, everyone's privates are and I find that hilarious. And so, people can get certainly amused about my tweets as well.
FYI, they're just copying the NFL. The NFL found a way that they wanted pants to look in a certain way, and that's what they wanted to do. All right, Marc, we do something here. We call it Fun Street. We're going to start off with something that I think you could relate to. Do you have an all-time favorite movie that you love to watch or rewatch that is like one of your go-tos? If it's on, you're in.
Man on Fire, Denzel Washington. And
that was on 2 nights ago. I flipped on it.
That movie is totally badass. And one of the really cool things I did recently, in fact, was I was the technical advisor for Denzel Washington's third part of the series.
Equalizer.
Equalizer
Yes.
3. So I was the tech advisor for that. But Man on Fire with Denzel Washington, I love that movie. I watch that every day.
Awesome. We're going to do this is kind of like, all right, so we're going to call this like a pub crawl. We're going to pretend we're going back to College Town, but here's the deal. These are just questions that I'm asking, and you're going to need to take a shot of gumption. You can handle it. You're a tough guy. And I think you'll get through it. You ready? Ready to rock and roll?
Yeah. All right.
Okay. Of late, a song that you love to listen to, or maybe one that pumps you up.
Slipknot. I'm a big heavy metal fan. This is a little disturbing to people.
I like it.
Yen by Slipknot.
All right, I'm on this.
There you go.
My producers are going to be like, how are we going to blend in that music under this episode here? I have no idea. A favorite food that is not a dessert?
A gyro.
Not surprising. We got your Greek culture in there.
Yeah.
A favorite dessert?
Creme caramel or creme brulee. I've always loved that.
I thought for sure baklava was going to pop out of there, but okay. An activity you wish you did more of?
Running. I'm getting old. My knees hurt.
An activity you wish you did less of?
An activity I wish I did less of. Worrying. Anxiety.
By the way, screw you, Marc. You're not getting old. I'm as old as you are. Enough of that. We're young at heart. That's how it is. An activity that's relatively new to you that you like so much because you recently tried it that you want to tell everybody else to do it?
Surfing. Windsurfing. That's the I'm going to try. So we have a house down the Outer Banks, and so windsurfing is something that I'm terrible at, but I want to get better at. I feel like that's going to be kind of a cool hobby to have in my retirement years.
If I were to snap my fingers and Marc Polymeropoulos could be anywhere in the world, where is he?
Mykonos, Greece, Greek islands. That's one of my happy places. That's where I used to go all the time growing up.
All right. Now we got some specific ones here that Mark and I can relate to. Okay. So the first one I want to go with, actually go back to the movies here. There are so many movies that highlight the CIA and roles that they have or different things. Is there one that in that genre that you really like, that really nails it, that really, really got what it was really like to be in the CIA more than anything else? Because I know you've seen them.
I would say Zero Dark 30 is a great movie. It's very controversial because some of the techniques that were used to extract information, but it's these are kind of real events that occurred. So that's a great, and then another great movie about the life of operations. It's actually not the CIA, but it's called Little Drummer Girl. It's an old John le Carré movie about the Mossad and how they recruited someone. But yeah, it's a heck of a movie.
As now an expert, by the way, they pick you in every category they could ask you. You're showing up on MSNBC. You're showing up the shows. First of all, one, would you have ever thought this is the world that you would have? And two, what do you like about that role that you get to do in this particular place where you get to step in and opine and whatnot? I'd love to hear it from your side in this end. So I kind of pulling back the fourth wall here.
So this is a really strange place where I'm at now. As I'm on TV and people recognize me, when I go out to restaurants or I'm in an airport or something, because I was in the shadows for 26 years. Like, you actually are not supposed to be recognized. My job was as a clandestine officer for the CIA, but Joe Scarborough was a friend of mine from work. A friend of mine from work, went to high school with him, and so when I retired, I just met Joe and we started kind of chatting. And I went on there a couple times and it wasn't very good. And then you just get better at it. And, the perspective I have is as an operator. And so they have a lot of people who are really smart with big fancy degrees. And, maybe they're at the Council on Foreign Relations or in policy circles. But what I talk about is what it's like from a CIA, so someone on the ground. And so it's just it's a different perspective. But I will tell you that, and, again, talking about humility, I was on Morning Joe one time and they asked me about artificial intelligence. And I gave some kind of answer because I probably looked it up on Wikipedia. And I get home and my son, who's in college, said that he was watching with my wife and he turned to my wife and he said, "Dad really doesn't know what the F he's talking about here, does he?" And she said, "No, he really doesn't." And so, there's some humility there. There's a lot or as my son says, "Don't worry, Dad, there's only 1 million people watching." But it's been interesting. I don't know how long I'm going to continue doing it because I think at some point there's a shelf life on this. But I have a unique perspective on the Middle East, and I think I can certainly make a difference. And people seem to like it, and MSNBC is paying me, so they seem happy. And so we'll see where it goes. I'm the other thing. I'm not nervous anymore going on there. I mean, I used to be. I was like, what am I doing? Wild imposter syndrome. I'm sure you've talked about that with folks before. I'm like,
oh yes.
What the F? What am I doing here? But now I'm like, screw it. I kind of belong here. And the fact of the matter is, I have something a little more unique to say. A little different perspective, and so it's been fun.
I think, fortunately or unfortunately, I can't figure out which way it is. Fortunately for you, I think I don't think there's a shelf life on this because I think the situation in the Middle East is just one of these that is always going to be prevalent, and obviously in the news today, everything going on in Israel and Gaza, and all the having knowledge of this area, there's always a need for expertise within this, and I've seen this. I mean, look how many of the pundits continue to play around with this. So hopefully that works for you, and hopefully you're enjoying it. But and I also have to comment, hopefully you're enjoying the facial thing going on here because you've had it for a long time.
No, that's right.
It's
one of the brand. It's the brand.
I had seen him. I look at him. I go, man, he's got a lot going on over there. But
oh yeah, no, you got to keep the brand. My wife hates this, but I said I can't shave it because you got to look like a kind of tough badass guy. And if I shave this, then I'm going to look just kind of older and I don't know.
Mark was going to be really nervous because he thought that I was going to really dive in deep into some of the personal stuff because I've known him for a long time. But I'm not going to because I want to give a sense of gratitude, a leadership message that you share in Clarity in Crisis, and that is, one, thank you for everything you're doing. Two, continue to go out there and share these messages. And I wanted to make the comment of, even now you're retired, he'll still say we regarding the CIA, because that's never unwinding in you. That's always going to be part of who you are. Because I think the world needs more people like you in this stuff who can help connect a lot of this stuff that is a mystery to most, but also something that's really important in the world. And thank you enough for that. And dude, so good to see you. We're glad we get to get you out of the shadows and continue to see more of you. We may have to loop you in. I think we have to have a reunion in the not too distant future.
Oh, we'll do it for sure. I would absolutely love that. It's been I've been so pleasantly surprised how I mean, obviously I'm in the media a little bit, but people have reached out and talking to you and to others, and just I will tell you that, coming on, knowing that, all the old crowd from Cornell is probably going to be watching this. I was like, I better be on my game here. I better put my A game on. I can go screw up in front of a million people on Morning Joe. Who cares? But all the old crew from Cornell are going to be watching and listening to this. So I better be good.
To close out this show, there once was a brother named Polymeropoulos. No, I kid. Marc Polymeropoulos, truly a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you for coming on, man, and thanks for everything you're doing. And keep on doing it, man. Great to see you.
Thanks so much. This was a blast. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
To all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep moving onward and upward, and remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Check us out on the web at thriveloud.com and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at Thrive Loud. And check us out on the Good Pods app at Thrive Loud, where you can follow, listen, and connect directly to Lou and all of the Thrive Loud episodes. Thanks for listening.